This check is fake.
Stop! That's Marcus Reed. We need his signature.
What? Not a snap, not a crack. Just the dry, deliberate whisper of thick paper separating beneath Cynthia Hale's hands. Yet, every conversation inside Commonwealth Atlantic Bank's Cedar Square branch stopped. Cynthia stood beyond the marble counter with one half of the $4 million cashier's check in each hand. Almost clinical. But expression pulse moved beneath the skin at her temple. She looked at the torn signature line. Then at Marcus she seemed certain would come. Marcus gave her none. He stood across the counter in a weathered rain jacket and boots dusted with pale concrete powder from the line construction site. Beside him, Alyssa Reed held a navy folder against her chest and had spent the last several minutes, lax solitaire, watching the bank manager ignore documents that should have ended the matter in less than one. Cynthia lowered the two pieces of the check onto the window by someone who appears to have just walked off a construction site. She had said moments earlier, loud enough for the customers in the waiting area to hear. The sentence had been polished. Free openly insulting language and shaped to sound like precaution. That made it worse. Marcus looked the verification letter beside her hand. The issuing bank's direct number is printed at the bottom. We have enough irregularities to place this item under review. Name 1. Her eyes had dropped to his boots before returning to his face. Your presentation does not match the nature of the transaction. Nearby, Maya Collins had already confirmed that the account identification and transaction code matched. Maya said carefully, "The system shows a verifica call now." Cynthia turned her head without moving the rest of her body. Maya's lips pressed together. She obeyed, but only by half a step. Marcus extended his hand across the counter. "If you will not verify it, return my property." Cynthia held the check away from him. Something changed in her face then. Not fear, exactly, but the irritation of someone whose judgment had been questioned in a room where she expected obedience. She folded the check once and tore through the signature. Now the two pieces lay between them. The papers inside shifted with a soft scrape. She moved toward the counter. Marcus caught her wrist gently before she completed the step. His hand was warm and steady. "Don't give them another story to write," he murmured. Alyssa looked at him. Beneath his calm, she saw the strain in the muscles along his jaw. He was not unhurt. He was controlling how the hurt could be used against him. "Marcus," to Cynthia, "you did not uncover fraud," he said. Cynthia's hand disappeared beneath the counter. A small light flashed beside her keyboard. "The customer is attempting to use a suspicious financial instrument," she announced, her voice carrying toward the lobby. "Has become confrontational and is pressuring staff." Several customers raised their phones. Others looked at Marcus with sudden caution, as though Cynthia's description had replaced everything they had witnessed, visibly uneasy as he looked from Marcus's open hands to the torn check. "Mr. Reed," he said quietly, "reading the name from you and your daughter to wait in the glass conference room while this is reviewed." "Are we under arrest?" Marcus asked. Another pause. "Not that I heard." Cynthia's eyes hardened. Leon opened the conference room door. Marcus guided anyone place a hand on either of them. They had nearly crossed the threshold when the branch's main doors opened behind them. Richard carrying a leather briefcase, then checking his watch. He had arrived early to prepare for a private signing meeting scheduled at noon when Marcus was expected to review the final terms of the $700 million Community Investment Fund. Instead, he saw Marcus standing beside security, Alyssa, and a $4 million check torn across the counter. Richard's arm lowered slowly. The briefcase nearly touched the floor. "Mr. Reed?" Cynthia that morning, certainty left her face. Richard had not merely recognized the man she had accused of fraud. Come to Cedar Square. 6 years before Cynthia Hale tore the check. Marcus quickly a life could split into a before and an after. His wife, Danielle, died in early spring. just as the dogwood trees along their West Haven street began to bloom. Grief did not arrive as one dramatic collapse. A coffee mug left untouched, a coat still hanging by the door. The silence after midnight, when Marcus finished work and remembered there was no one awake to tell him he had done enough for one day. Marcus was still young then. Marcus spent his mornings negotiating loans, visiting properties, and his nights reviewing budgets at the kitchen table while Alyssa studied across from him. He never stayed. He showed up for every college milestone, graduation ceremony, medical appointment, and important meeting. Some nights he worked until dawn, changed shirts where she needed to be without mentioning that he had not slept. He did not build Reed Community Capital to a company, bought aging apartment buildings before rents pushed working families out. It financed trade centers in Beirut's neighborhoods, large banks, family-owned shops, whose owners had revenue but little collateral, and helped people build credit without no umps in glass towers. Marcus had no interest in glass towers with his name across the lobby. He preferred buildings where the lights came back, and Annalisa stood inside one of them, the North Line, the core center. The note had once been a warehouse beside a rail spur on West Haven's east side. For years, its windows had been boarded and its loading bays chained. Fresh drywall brightened the classrooms, and the old shipping floor had been divided into training labs and a modest lecture hall. When finished, in the electrical work, medical billing, commercial driving, and building maintenance, Alyssa had designed a financial education track for adults rebuilding after layoffs. She crossed the unfinished main classroom with a clipboard against her side, counting outlets, she said. And the customer rights materials have to be finalized before Friday's instructor review. Marcus brushed dust from a newly installed desk. This Friday, try not to make everyone terrified of banks before the second session. Alyssa smiled, though her eyes stayed serious. People are not afraid of banks when no one tells them what those rights are. Marcus held her gaze. Danielle had carried the same quiet certainty, the habit of saying something simple and leaving it in the room until everyone else caught up. The $4 million cashier's check inside his leather document case came from selling part of his early stake in a logistics technology company. The remaining $1 million would create a loan guarantee fund for households with steady income but thin credit files. Sect. Because a computer could not see the construction floor toward the exit, Alyssa glanced at the case. They crossed the construction floor toward the exit. Why didn't you have Denise coming downtown? Because is not the real answer. Marcus pushed open the metal door. Morning light spread across the cracked parking lot. A place that how to treat people from the community. He was not staging a test. He had not chosen worn work pants to make a point, and he was not hiding his position to trap anyone. His boots were dusty because he had active construction site. His jacket was old because it still worked. After the deposit, he and Alyssa scheduled to meet Richard Sloan about Commonwealth Atlantic Bank managing a $700 million community investment fund. Marcus expected the stop at Cedar Square. He placed the document minutes behind the passenger seat of his pickup and drove toward the bank. He entered carrying money meant to teach people their rights. Before the hour ended, he would be forced to prove he had the right to stand at the counter. Marcus and Alyssa entered the Cedar Square branch. That morning, the lobby was bright. Blue chairs faced the service counters. Photographs showed families receiving house keys and business owners shaking hands with bankers. Paused near reception, the leather document case beneath one arm. A teller glanced at the dust on his boots. Without asking she pointed toward a metal drop box. Marcus looked at the box, then back at her. I'm not making a delivery. I'm a customer, and I need to complete a deposit at the counter. No one invited them to sit. Rearranged papers. Two looked toward the door rather than Marcus. Alyssa checked the time on her phone. 3 minutes later, walked in wearing a charcoal suit and a silver watch. Cynthia Hale stepped out of her office before he reached the center of the lobby. "Good to see you again." She shook his hand, asked about his dealership, and offered him coffee. He was served first. Janet Ellis, a retired principal waiting near the loan offices, glanced at the clock above the entrance, then at Marcus and Alyssa. She had spent most of her life noticing his pip to up without complaint. Still, she lowered her eyes to the magazine in her lap. When Maya Collinsons finally motioned Marcus forward, he placed the document case on the counter, his driver's license, cashier's card, source of funds letter, and the issuing bank's verification number. Maya entered his information. The screen filled with facts that should have made the transaction routine. The account no fraud alerts, disputed deposits, or identity concerns. An advance notice from the issuing bank had arrived that morning. The commercial division had also recorded his noon plop president. Nothing on the screen supported suspicion either. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Reed. I just need to complete the verification call." She reached for the phone. She did not look at the monitor first. She looked at Marcus. Her eyes moved over the worn jacket. The plain leather case, the plain on his boots, and the blacksman standing before a check carrying more zeros than most people saw in a lifetime. Marcus' two newer sedans. Cynthia picked up the check. "Which company are you bringing this in for?" "The payee is listed on the front," Marcus said. Cynthia glanced down, then back at two. For a moment, Marcus said nothing. The mistake was no longer subtle. Cynthia had read his name and could not place it in his hands. She could imagine him carrying the check switch for someone else. She had not imagined it belonged to him. At the next station, Grant handed over a $90,000 check from his dealership and approved it after checking only his driver's license. No one asked Grant where the money came from. He owned the business printed on the check. No one looked outside to decide whether his car matched his account. Then he looked at Cynthia. "Why are his documents enough while mine are not?" Cynthia straightened the check against the counter. "Your situation requires greater caution." Alyssa's eyes sharpened. Marcus kept his voice calm. "What does fits the profile mean?" Cynthia looked toward the waiting area, aware that Janet had raised her head again. "By what written standard?" Marcus asked. Cynthia did not name one. Maya glanced at the verification notice glowing on her screen. Her hand moved toward the phone, but Cynthia placed her palm over the keyboard and closed the window. Maya waited until Cynthia turned from Marcus before speaking. "The issuing bank is still holding for verification," she said under her breath. Cynthia did not answer at once. She looked across the lobby instead. Janet Ellis had stopped pretending to read. A man near the entrance watched over the rim of his coffee cup. Grant Whitmore had finished his deposit but remained beside the counter, listening with the problem belonged to another person. Cynthia's expression shifted. The coldness did not disappear. It simply moved behind a trained customer service smile. "Mr. Reed," she said, lowering her voice, "a transaction of this size deserves privacy room." Alyssa released a breath she had been holding. She gathered the source letter and project documents, believing the tension had finally reached the point where common sense would take over. Marcus looked at the glass room beside the lobby. Its walls were clear from floor to ceiling, but he nodded. She carried the check herself. "Of course," Cynthia said. As Marcus and Alyssa entered, Cynthia glanced toward Leon Briggs, the branch security officer. Leon moved into position beside the door. He did not block it completely, but his presence changed the purpose of the room. Cynthia sat opposite them and placed the check near her elbow rather than returning it to Marcus. She opened the account review on her tablet, selected a brief note. Marcus caught the phrase before she angled the screen away. Transaction under enhanced review. Customers could see Marcus under Leon's watch, but could not hear why, making the scene look like an investigation before one had begun. Marcus placed his passport card on the table. "I'll also need proof of employment." My name is attached to the account and the check. Employment documentation is still required. Alyssa slid a Reed Community Capital Business profile from her folder. This does not establish your authority over the funds. Marcus pointed to the source over the funds. You have their direct number. Cynthia continued as if he had not spoken. She asked for the original purchase agreement from the logistics company and the number of beneficial owner person who actually managed Marcus' finances. I manage my finances, Marcus said. Cynthia's gaze, clients usually work through private banking professionals. Usually, Marcus repeated, to protect both you, the institution, for the check your system shows on properly documented, from an unusual presentation. Alyssa leaned forward. You keep using were identified one unusual and inconsistent. Cynthia turned to her. I'm speaking with the account slightly. Marcus lifted one hand slightly. He then looked through the glass toward Grant. Did Mr. Whitmore provide a second identification card? Cynthia followed his gaze. His transactions was different. Did he provide proof that he owned the dealership? Then, put the difference in writing, Marcus said. List the document he had that I do not. I'm not required to justify internal risk procedures. You are applying those costless procedures to my property. A quiet pressure settled into the room. Alyssa looked down and noticed Marcus's hands resting flat on the table, fingers separated, every movement measured. Dad, Alyssa whispered. What are you doing? He kept his eyes on Cynthia, making sure no one can describe an ordinary movement as something else. Alyssa looked through the glass. People moved past, with few watched openly now. Her father had spent her entire life appearing calm in difficult rooms. Now she had undertaken, it required work. He was monitoring his hands, his voice, even the space between his chair and the table, 'cause how quickly posure could be rewritten as menace. Cynthia was Gaffew. Alyssa's shoulders bank. Marcus's shoulders softened. Cynthia lifted the receiver, then set it back into the cradle without dialing. She turned her tablet toward herself, opened and began typing beneath the heading, Fraud read upside down. Marcus could read report. Marcus, she could angle the tablet away. Suspected fraud incident report. The words sat there with the quiet authority of an official record, already shaping an event. No one had bothered a fraud report before calling the issuing bank, he asked. Cynthia's fingers remained above the keyboard. This is standard procedure. Show me the procedure that allows you to hold a customer's property. You. Cynthia did not answer. She began typing. Marcus watched the sentence appear one word at a time. Customer became visibly agitated when asked to provide verification. He looked at her face, that she understood the difference between recording an event and rewriting it. He said, his voice never rose. I am objecting to your refusal to verify. Cynthia continued typing. Customer attempted to direct internal procedures. Tightened. Outside the glass room, Maya stood near her terminal, close enough to hear fragments of the exchange. She opened an internal service note and began documenting to identification. Customer has not raised his voice. Issuing bank has not been contacted. Manager remains in possession of the financial instrument. Maya's hand trembled. Note employee number, but she saved it anyway. Maya, she called sharply. Mayets, return to your assigned station. I am at my station, Maya said. Her voice, Cynthia, opened the door. Then stop involving yourself in a matter outside your authority. Alyssa stood. Cynthia turned professional smile, disappeared. Mrs. Reed, you and your father are now attempting to pressure multiple employees during an active review. We are asking someone to tell the truth. Alyssa's anger did not come out as a shout. Marcus rose halfway and touched her forearm. Alyssa. She looked at him, frustrated by the restraint in his voice. To her, stepping back felt like allowing Cynthia to win. He had worn it himself when he was younger, that being right did not protect a black man from the story, Others might build around his reaction. Being right does not always mean you are free to respond any point you want, he said softly. Alyssa's eyes flashed with disappointment. Instead, she opened the Notes app on her phone and began every request and every sentence she could remember. Cynthia opened Maya, confirmed no call had been made. At 10:27, Cynthia described questions as pressure. Across the lobby, she had watched Cynthia pick up the phone and set it down without dialing. She crossed her purse against her counter. "Is that gentleman being detained?" she asked. Maya looked toward the glass room. "We are handling a transaction with serious irregularities." She said it loudly enough for the entire lobby. A man near the coffee station glanced at Marcus, then whispered to the woman beside him. Another customer recording through the glass. Someone repeated the amount, 4 million, and the number moved through the room faster than the facts. Grant Whitmore stepped from the counter, as though suspicion could spread by proximity. Marcus watched the lobby change around him. Minutes earlier, he had been a customer waiting for a routine call. Now people studied him as if the report had already become proof. She had transformed her refusal to he required investigation. Maya looked at the issuing bank's notice, still open on her monitor. Monsieur said, "By making the call." Cynthia stared at her. Then she looked at Janet and Marcus seated behind glass. Her face settled into a new kind of calm. She returned to the room, reached across the table, and lifted the $4 million check. Cynthia carried the check out of the glass room as though removing it from Marcus's reach. The truth had settled the question, trolled the truth. She returned to the main counter, placed the document the white lobby lights, and faced the customers now watching from every corner of the branch. This instrument's multiple can be established. Until its legitimacy can be established, the bank has a responsibility to prevent further use. Marcus followed her into the lobby. The glass door eased shut at their backs. "You have not identified one inconsistency," Marcus said. Cynthia called did not look at him. "The matter is under internal review." Then returned the check. Her fingers settled more firmly over the paper. "May need to invalidate it to prevent misuse." Maya looked up from her terminal. The color left her face as she understood what Cynthia meant. "Ms. Hale, we cannot a customer's document a concern or contact the issuer, but the check remains his property." Cynthia turned on her. "I have already instructed you to stay out of this. You are challenging your manager in front of customers." Maya's mouth closed, but Marcus stepped closer to the counter, stopping at a distance no reasonable person could describe as threatening. One rested at his side, the other extended toward the check, palm open. "You have two legitimate choices," he said. "You do not have the right to invent a third." Cynthia stared at his hand. For 1 second, some uncertainty passed through her expression. She could still have ended it, but pride took the place of judgment. The center. Alyssa saw the motion before anyone else understood it. "Don't," she said. Cynthia pressed her thumbnail into the crease and tore through the signature line. The sound barely rose of the ventilation system, yet it seemed to travel into every corner of the branch. One half remained in Cynthia's hand. The other slipped from the counter and before landing near Alyssa's shoes. Janet Ellis lowered her phone for half a second, stunned by the simplicity of the act. Alyssa looked down at the half-check on the floor. She saw 12 computers not yet ordered, classroom lights still disconnected, training equipment waiting in a supplier's warehouse, whose first certification the manager had decided their future did not look believable in Marcus's hands. Marcus touched her shoulder. "No." She looked at him. His face was controlled, but his eyes had darkened. "You do not have to kneel for something," another lifted sharply. That sounded like a threat. Marcus turned toward her. "It was a sentence to my daughter. My behavior has not changed." Cynthia's hand disappeared beneath the counter and pressed the internal security alert. Then she picked up the phone and called the police directly. I have him attempting to present a suspicious multi-million-dollar instrument, she told the dispatcher. Refusing to leave the transaction area, Alyssa stared at her. The lie no longer hid inside cautious language. It was being approached, slower than before. His eyes moved over Marcus's open hands, the phone's recording, and the torn check at Alyssa's feet. I need you to return to the conference room until officers arrive. Marcus held his gaze. First, tell the people recording whether I am under arrest, Leon squallowed. No, sir. Have I threatened anyone? Leon glanced at Cynthia. She waited for him to hear a threat, he said. A small murmur moved through the lobby. Have I? No, sir. You asked for it. Cynthia's face tightened. Leon had not disobeyed her. He had done-snotted and walked beside him toward the glass room. Marcus beside him toward the glass room. Blocked. Olivia bound half of the chaff of the check where it had fallen. They were only the torn half of the check where it had opened. Marcus stood beside security. Alyssa held the North Line files, and the two halves of the $4 million check remained separated between Cynthia's hand and the floor. Mr. Reed, Alyssa named to produce shame, or at least an apology. Cynthia offered neither. She crossed the lobby quickly and reached at a fraudulent transactions to a significant again. That could have exposed the bank to a significant loss. Richard did not turn toward her. Then he looked at Marcus. Who did this? Sloan set his briefcase on the nearest desk and stood beside Maya. And show me the verification history. Richard. I can explain. Not yet. His voice was quiet, but the familiarity in her use Marcus's information. The account showed 12 years of clean history, the $4 million deposit notice, and Marcus issuing regarding the $700 million fund. The truth had been waiting inside Cynthia's own system the entire time. Cynthia kept her shoulders square, because the transaction did not match the way he presented himself. Richard's expression changed, not dramatically, but he looked toward Grant Whitmore, still standing near the coffee station. The coffee station. Fewer. Cynthia said nothing. Did you ask whether the vehicle he drove matched the amount of his deposit? Her eyes moved briefly toward the windows. So was Mr. Reed's. For 12 years, several customers lowered their phones. The man who had whispered about the $4 million check now studied the floor. Marcus Reed is the founder of Reed Capital. He is also the authorized to approve the $700 million community investment agreement this bank has spent months pursuing. Cynthia faced him again. Mr. Reed, this has clearly been an unfortunate misunderstanding. It was the first time she had used his name with respect. I was the same man. Before Mr. Sloan walked through that door, the check was the same check. Cynthia's composure around the edges. Had you identified yourself properly, contacted private banking, or arrived in a manner consistent with a transaction of this scale, none of this would have happened. Alyssa inhaled sharply. How wealthy does a customer need to be before you follow correct procedure? Cynthia opened her mouth, but no answer came. We should continue this conversation privately and handle it professionally. Marcus looked through the glass conference room walls, in Pablots. The humiliation watched Cynthia in front of everyone. The truth does not need to hide behind a door. Marcus pointed toward Cynthia's tablet. They are incomplete, she said. Maya returned to the workstation and opened the incident record. She's adding claims that contradict the time-stamped service note. Cynthia reached Conad first, activating the dispute lock. Maya's note said customer has not raised his voice. Cynthia's report said customer became loud. Cynthia wrote refused to cooperate. Maya recorded requested verification. Cynthia wrote pressured employees to bypass procedure. Do you understand what you're doing to your career? But she left it on the keyboard. Maya's handed on the keyboard. I understand I'm stopping the record from saying something that didn't happen. Leon stepped forward before Cynthia could answer. Reed did not resist me. He asked to have the check verified. Janet Ellis crossed the lobby and held out her phone. The video showed Cynthia refusing the verification call tearing the check and summoning security after Marcus requested a written explanation. Two police approached the entered. Cynthia as made staff feel unsafe. The female officer asked Cynthia to identify the exact threatening action. Richard removed a temporary access envelope from a drawer and placed it on the counter. Surrender your badge, keys, and system token. You are being placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Cynthia stared at him. He blocked his squat. You made the accusation of evidence will be public too. Cynthia handed over her credentials one item at a time. Marcus would not have welcomed it. A few customers approached him afterward with apologies that sounded sincere, but late. Alyssa sorry because they know you did nothing wrong? Are they sorry because they know you have power? Marcus had negotiated deals worth more than entire neighborhoods. He had answered hostile investors without for his daughter. Before they left, Janet's video was already online. The number of views climbed quickly. The question that stayed with him was the one Alyssa had asked in a quiet voice. By noon the next day, Janet Ellis's 43-second video had left West Haven. It moved from local community pages to national feeds and was soon paired with witness accounts and branch security footage. Together, the evidence showed Cynthia $1,000 the check, while Grant Whitmore had completed a $90,000 deposit after presenting one piece of identification: mouth. The sentence viewers repeated most fits the profile of his account. Mr. Stats, commenters, comments asked the question the bank could not answer. A tailored suit? A newer car? A white-face Atlantic's public statement called the Cladic the incident troubling and promised a complete review. It did not explain why a 12-year customer had been treated as a possible criminal before anyone made a phone call. Overread Community Capital's Segen banking regulator requested the branch records. Corporate counsel ordered every security video, audit log, internal message, and account note preserved. Former Cedar Square employees, some answered cautiously. Others had been waiting years for someone to ask the right question. Within 72 hours, the first review found 9 prior complaints. Most came from black customers, or people living in lower-income neighborhoods the bank had marked as higher risk. None of the files contained of cleaner than that, not consistent with account profile. Enhanced verification required. Customer presentation inconsistent with expected transaction profile. The phrases sounded neutral until investigators compared who received them and who did not. A former teller named Rebecca Mills described the pattern plainly. Cynthia would act certain for a second identification card, business licenses, and proof of address even when the system showed no warning. If they became frustrated, Cynthia recorded the frustration as confirmation that the original suspicion had been justified. By Friday evening, reporters had located 3 of the 9 customers. One was a retired transit mechanic whose pension check had been held for 2 weeks and had been asked to prove she was depositing money for someone else. A third had closed his account after security was called when he requested a written explanation. That night, Marcus and Alyssa sat inside the unfinished Northline Opportunity Center. Rain struck the warehouse windows. The hallway lights had not been connected, leaving the corridor beyond the classroom dark. Northline's opening schedule the replacement tacked, but the issuing bank was still the replacement check, leaving the next equipment payment temporarily pending. Marcus sat on an unopened box of Alice beside him. The day's headlines glowed on Alyssa's phone, but she turned the screen face down. "If you did not control that fund," she asked. Marcus looked toward the unlit hallway. He could have answered with the careful language he used in board meetings. The regulator had authority. The video created pressure. None of those answers touched the question. Alyssa watched him in the dim light. "Did today prove the system works?" she asked. or only that you are powerful enough to force us on his knees for years. Marcus Rest ad influence mattered most when used responsibly. Now he saw the harder truth. A system that corrected itself a victim's title had not truly corrected itself. Cynthia losing access him was not enough. One man had been rescued by recognition. I don't know, Marcus said at last. Alyssa nodded, not because the answer satisfied her, but because it was honest. The next morning, Commonwealth read Community Capital with a sealed envelope and a new check. This one was not for $4 million. It was the price the Marcus would accept for his silence. The attorneys arrived with a settlement packet thick enough to look like accountability. At the top, cashier's check made payable to Marcus Reed, followed by an offer to cover legal fees. Continued negotiations, continued apologies, and guarantee Cynthia Hale would never return to Cedar Square. In exchange, mark his participation in the internal investigation. The lead attorney called it a path toward closure, then slid the check back across the table. I have already seen what this bank does to a check when it dislikes the person holding it, he said. I do not need another one to help the bank forget. Executives table. Around the conference table, several read to end the relationship completely. They argued that only a financial loss, large forts Commonwealth Atlantic to learn. Marcus understood the anger. Part of him shared it. But she saw the people hidden behind the punishment. Would protect Reed Community Capital, but it would not repair the bank for customers who, without forcing change, she said. They lose ours for business, but the people who remain inherit the same's the bank. He chose to use the agreement as leverage for reform rather than walk away and leave the system unchanged. He left the proof agreement on the table and demanded proof of change before his signatures. He did not begin with policy language. On the first screen, the played beside security footage of Grant Whitmore's deposit. Grant showed one license and completed his deposit within minutes. Marcus provided and was treated as a threat. Different amounts may require different levels of review, Marcus said. The same trigger, the same documentation. The second screen compared Maya's timed service note with Cynthia's contradictory incident report. Calm versus loud, and verification requested versus staff pressured. The Class Act. Market required automatic locks on disputed records, permanent timestamps on every edit, and protection for employees who preserved evidence. The third case showed how unable to mark a customer suspicious, hold his property, and call security without independent review. Before any account freeze or fraud referral, unless an immediate legal threat existed. Then Alyssa stood. She placed a single-page form on receipt. It listed why a transaction had been stopped, who made the decision, how to appeal, and the number of an independent review line. A person should not need a lawyer. A title or a viral video displaying why a bank no, she told the board. The final screen displayed that had disappeared into internal files. Marcus reporting on complaint outcomes and funding for Open Door Financial Access, a community-run program teaching customers how to document disputes, build credit, and challenge inconsistent treatment. The bank could fund it, but it could not control it. Richard sat at the far end of the table, listening without defense. Each demand cost was the bank money, in that the failure had not begun with one torn check. It had begun whenever convenience mattered more than fairness and whenever silence had been mistaken for proof that no harm had been done. Cynthia's employment was terminated, and the investigation file was straight ranking regulator for further review. Faced perceptive earlier complaints, Maya received written retaliation. Leon entered retraining and helped redesign the security protocol so employees had to describe a specific action before labeling anyone threatening. All 9 for independent review. The board sent Marcus a revised agreement. He did not sign. I do not sign promises, he said. I sign when the promise has become a habit. 4 months later, Marcus returned to Cedar's audit review. He carried no check and asked for no special treatment. He wanted to observe whether the new procedure, the audit, had changed the way ordinary customers were treated. 4 months later, the North Line Opportunity Centers, beneath a clear Virginia morning, the old warehouse no longer smelled of dust and rainwater. Computers lined the walls. Training equipment stood where Rusteds had once been stacked. In the largest classroom, Reed placed an enlarged copy of the torn $4 million check on the screen. She did not present it as proof that her family had defeated a bank manager. "Keep every document," she told the adult seated before her. "Ask for the reason in writing." Verification standard applies to everyone. You record the name of the person else when the tangent becomes something else when the rules change, depending on who is standing at the counter. She showed them how to request a second review, how to preserve a transaction record, and how to correct language that falsely described calm questions as aggression. Marcus from the back of the room, Miss. One half of the original check remained inside a private file in his office. He had refused it in Northline's lobby. It was not a trophy. To him, the torn paper represented the people who had no Richard Sloane walking through the door at the right moment. Marcus Alyssa returned to Cedar Square. The branch looked familiar, but the details had changed. A customer rights notice stood beside the entrance in plain language. Additional verification requests now required a written reason then screens. Tellers could request an independent review without a manager's approval. The account record locked automatically. Every receipt carried the number of an outside complaint office. Security staff could no longer describe someone as threatening or uncooperative without identifying the exact action that supported the claim. Maya Collins, the counter. She had joined the regional ethics training team, not because she had defended a wealthy executive, but because she had stopped an official record from becoming a lie. Leon Briggs approached more slowly. He had completed his retraining and helped rewrite the branch's security that day. He told Marcus. "I still waited for someone with a higher title to say it first." There was shame in Leon's face, but no attempt to escape it. Marcus said, "Look at what is happening in front of you." Richard presented the first independent audit that afternoon. The report confirmed that the new procedures were active. The 9 former complaints had been reopened, and compensation reviews were underway. He did not describe the incident. "The damage did not begin when Cynthia tore the check," he said, "when smaller complaints were treated as too inconvenient to deserve attention. Only after the outsiders verified the reforms did Marcus Atlantic to manage Reed Commonwealth Community Capital's $700 million fund. The signing was not the moment he had come to see. Near the end of the afternoon, entered the branch wearing a Navy mechanic's uniform. Dust covered the toes of his work boots, almost Marcus's boots 4 months earlier. No one knew whether it contained a paycheck, loan documents, or a check large enough to change his life. A teller was already helping another customer. "But she looked up. Afternoon, sir. I'll be with you as soon as I finish here." She handed Corrida a number, pointed out the water station. She handed him a number and asked help completing any forms. No one judged his balance by his clothes or asked him he belongs. Alyssa stood beside Marcus across the lobby. Marcus watched the man settle into a chair, still holding the envelope carefully in both hands. Respect should not arrive after a title. It should be the first thing through the door. If this the video and subscribe for more. Which moment stayed with you most, and where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments.